Chris Parkin Shooting Sports. Little project today. I've got a Timney trigger for this CZ452 rifle. Now, CZ452 rifles tend to live forever, and you can pick them up for very little money. But one thing they suffer from is they've got quite a poor trigger on them. And there'll be plenty of naysayers who say, don't dry fire rimfires, but do you know what? Thousands of times, never a problem. Obviously, check your gun, it's clear, take the magazine out if you want, but I'm just going to dry fire that. And that is quite a heavy trigger, but it's also got a lot of creep on it. And creep is the movement of the trigger blade before the actual trigger breaks and the shot fires. So I'm just going to actually see what that weighs before we start. And we can do this on here. And that's coming in at £3 7.6 ounces, which is 1,576 grams. And I can watch this trigger blade actually move as I squeeze the trigger, and the end of the trigger blade moves about 3 millimeters before the trigger breaks. So anyway, this is the Timney trigger suitable for this rifle. Now, I won't be able to swap this on camera because I suspect it might contravene some of YouTube's algorithms and things like that. But essentially, this is going to give me a single stage adjustable trigger. This one fits CZ452, 17 Mach 2 and 22LR options, factory calibrated, ready to shoot and fully adjustable for sear engagement, which is a creep, over travel, which some people call follow through, and trigger pull, which will go from 2 to 4 pounds on this unit. It says drop in complete assembly trigger, no gunsmithing required, ready to install. The other factors that we can see on here are, since 1946, Timney's brought together the best people, technology and materials to innovate, engineer and hand-build the finest triggers in the world. Legendary Timney triggers with their lighter, crisper, more consistent pull is the single most important upgrade you can add to your firearm. So we shall see if it will improve this 452. Now, back in the day, you used to be able to get trigger spring kits and little brass bushings that go over some of the pins in the trigger. It was a little bit Heath Robinson. This is a totally integrated unit. So I'm going to fit this. I'll get some photographs, put them on the film, and see how we get by with that. And then afterwards, we're going to measure it again and see what it comes out like. But that's it for the moment. So let's get round to doing the tools. Sorry I can't show that on camera. First stage is I've got the old 452 out the stock. You can see the trigger as they work there. Quite a sort of Heath Robinson looking unit, and that's the new Timney there. Comes with instructions, does have a disclaimer with it on how to make sure you are not making a mess of things. So that's the old trigger removed. I just used the pin punch down there, took those two pins out, slid those through. It's all under spring tension, so just watch nothing flicks out of the way. And now we can use those pins to put the new trigger back in. Now there's a small grub screw in there. Just got to loosen that, because that will then, when the pins go through the action down here, that will then tighten up to snug this up against its pin. So I'm just going to do that now. So put the trigger in. We've now just got to align those holes and just put the pins back through, make sure everything goes in nice and neatly, and then we can tension that little grub screw down in there just to hold it snug against the steel receiver. Where you can't obviously hold that pin punch while I'm holding the camera, and there isn't quite enough space to just fit that together, but you can imagine what's going on. The pin is a bit longer than it necessarily needs to be, because the old sear fitted externally over the top of that, but that is now in. It's just not quite tight, so I just need to get the Allen key and tension the little grub screw just to make sure that that is going to sit absolutely stationary. Now it's just slightly out of alignment. That this screw here is just in the way, so it's easier just using a ball-ended Allen key, and you can see that wobbles. And then as I just nip this up, that will stop wobbling. Now I'm going to take that out, see if I can pop that in there just to get a bit more tension on that. I think that should be satisfactory now. Let's check. just ever so slightly misaligned because of this screw here. So you just need to be very delicate with it, make sure you don't damage the Allen socket. Now it does say that because of the difference in stock fits, you might need to relieve some of the woodwork in your stock just to make space for that trigger, and this is one that will need a little bit of work doing here. So I'm going to run a file in this and just broaden and just lengthen that slot there for the trigger ever so slightly, because it's just a little bit too long. Right, so the trigger's on. It took about 10 minutes to put the trigger on. Not really a problem, just need to make sure you find the right Allen key for just tightening that screw in the bottom there. And actually that's very simple, straightforward. It takes slightly longer because you do have to just make a few adjustments to the inlet on the actual stock itself. Now there are these two extensions on the back of the sears here, and those do have to be put sort of back into where the rear pillar screw goes there. You've got to just broaden it ever so slightly for the trigger fitting itself, and just a little bit off the front, in the front of the trigger pocket here, and then it will go in. So to put it back together, it's easier doing it on a flat surface. Don't forget your little dovetail recoil lug back in there, which just slots in the action like that, and now that's not going in. A lot of these pieces have got quite a lot of hand making on them, and they're not quite as tight a tolerance as modern guns are, because some of them are very old. And then that now will just fit quite comfortably on there. So trigger guard spacer there, the trigger guard itself goes on here. Similarly, some of these screws, that's a wood screw there, and they're all parallel, so they could do better with a turn screw than a tapered screwdriver, but needs must. Right, now these can sometimes, they're very fine pitch thread on them, and sometimes they're just a little bit difficult to just get them to find their respective threads. But once you have, they'll just go in with finger tension. Don't, whatever you do, start swinging on things too hard. Right, that's going to go back in there now, that's fitting fine. So I'm just going to bump the back of the stock, make sure everything's fitting back towards its recoil lugs. Of course it's a 2.2 rimfire this, so it's not massive recoil. Forgive me for not looking at the camera, I'm sort of concentrating on what I'm doing. And then the bolt goes back in here. Now of course on a CZ452 you have got to squeeze the trigger to make sure the bolt will go in and out, because that effectively acts as your bolt release. And now, there we go. Now again, this is a safe dry fire. Please no complaints over dry firing a rimfire. And I can see now on the trigger blade, I've got absolutely zero creep. There's a little bit of over travel, but there's zero creep. You can adjust the over travel. Some instructions come with it and do tell you how to do that. Pop that back in there because that's going to get lost otherwise. And there we go. So it's all done. Now, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. Now I haven't actually made any setting changes to this at all. Now the screw on the front of the trigger is a sear engagement screw. That's what actually controls the creep, and that's actually Loctited in. There's some green Loctite on that. But you can change the weight, and of course that then gives you the biggest advantage you can have on one of these triggers. So let's see what this is now performing at compared to its previous setting. So it's now £2, 3.9 ounces, which is 1,017 grams. Let's give it another one just for a bit of a look. 999 grams, third attempt. These gauges are quite critical of how fast you pull them, so you need to put them on very gently and then just ease them slowly in tension. Yeah, we've got 1,200 grams now. That's going consistently. I'm pulling this consistently, very steadily. Yeah, 1,200 grams again. So if you pull it quickly, you'll get a lighter pull weight effectively, because that's just the inaccuracy of this type of gauge. You do get used to these things. But the biggest issue wasn't the weight for me, it was the amount of creep, and you could feel the sears grinding across each other. But that now is giving me a super crisp feel for the trigger with great predictability. So that is that. Right, well thank you to Hannum's Reloading for the donation of this trigger for this project. I think it's worked very well, and I'm quite happy to add it to this rifle, because although it's an old rifle, it's a very good rifle, and it's one of the greatest gateways into shooting any shooter might ever have. So, I hope you enjoyed watching that review. Please like, subscribe, comment, click the notification bell, and keep track of the regular uploads. Thank you for watching. Bye for now.